Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm a former Boeing 737 pilot, and welcome to our descent preparation tutorial in the iFly Boeing 737 MAX. We are nearing our top of descent into San Francisco, and we can go ahead and start to set our aircraft up for our descent and approach. The first thing that we have to do is to gather the active weather, and since we don't have an ACARS at the moment I'm recording this in the aircraft, let's go ahead and have a look into the Navigraph chart app, and if we go on to San Francisco over here, we can collect the real-world ATIS from San Francisco. So let's go ahead and have a look. Arrival runways are 28 left and 28 right, and the wind is 290 at 13. Few low-lying clouds over here, 17 degrees, altimeter 3002. As soon as the altimeter setting is received, we are going to pre-select that over here, so that's going to be 3002, and we're also going to select that on the ISFD, and thereafter set it back to standard. Next up, let's go ahead and find out about our landing runway. So we're expecting 26 right today. So we already have the star selected over here. Let's go to the charts, approach, and then ILS runway 28 right, and let's pin that down here as well. Alright, next up we need to change tools from the Navigraph charts over to our flight plan, as we are going to start our setup for the approach. So going down into the FMS, there are a couple of things that we need to start preparing and setting up. So first of all, we start on the VNAV page by clicking next page and going to the descent page. Check that the target speed is appropriate, and we can change the speed restriction at 10,000 to become 250 at 10,000, since that is the maximum that we're allowed to fly. From here we continue towards the forecast page, and we are going to enter the transition level, which is 180 in San Francisco, and then we're going to enter the descent winds. I do like to use flight level 310, flight level 200, and flight level 100, respectively 10,000, as that does provide a very good average over the course of the descent, and therefore VNAV can do the most accurate predictions. We can get the winds down here from the flight plan, so at flight level 310 we can see it is 313 at 21 knots. So 313 at 21, then at flight level 200 it is 268 at 13, and in 10,000 feet we have 229 at 12. Alright, and we can go ahead and execute that. From here we are going to move to the fix page, where we're going to create the rings around our landing runway. So we'd say runway 28 right, which is the landing runway, and now we're going to draw 3 rings onto this one. The first one serves as a reminder for and a gross error check for our top of descent, and for this we simply take 3 times the cruising altitude. So we're cruising in 36,000, take 36 times 3, that's 108. So we're going to enter /108 and put that up here. The second ring serves for high energy approach prevention, and that's always going to be a 10-mile ring. The reason why is that 10 miles from the airport we have to have a speed of 200 knots true airspeed or less, at least flaps 1, and we have to be in 3,000 feet above the airfield elevation. The last ring is going to be based on the weather conditions on the arrival. If you're required to do, or if a stable gate at 1,000 feet is required, then we're going to use a 5-mile ring, otherwise we are going to use a 4-mile ring. So let's have a look into the weather one more time. And since the cloud ceiling is at 800 feet down here, we are going to use a 5 nautical mile ring, since the approach is considered to be an IMC, and therefore we need to be stabilized at 1,000 feet above the ground. So /5 is going to be entered over here. Basically, if the cloud ceiling is 1,000 feet or higher and the flight visibility is 5,000 meters or more, then you can use a 4-mile ring and the 500-foot stable gate applies. Last but not least, we have to check that our arrival is actually correct. So we are flying via the Diamond 3 arrival and the Rasmi transition today. We have already passed Rasmi and are en route to Diamond today. So Diamond is over here, and we have a maximum of 290 knots and above flight level 270. As you can see, we have 290 knots and flight level 270 above in here. Moving on towards Laney, 280 knots between flight level 220 and 260, and that is exactly what we have down here in our FMS as well. Then we continue via Always, and we have that towards Flows, 280 knots between 14,000 and flight level 190, which we have in here, and then towards CDES at 250 knots between 10,000 and 12,000. And that is in here as well. From there we continue towards Freely, 230 knots above 8,000, which we have, and then towards Archie, which is at 7,000, and from there we are going to continue on to the arrival. So looking into the ILS chart for runway 28 right, coming from Archie, mandatory 7,000, which is what we have in here. We continue via Xylet towards Gear and then towards Dumba. So we have Xylet, Gear, Dumba, and Xylet is 5,000. Sorry, Gear is at 5,000, Dumba at 4,000, and all of that checks. We join the final at Sapin, 3,000 feet, which we have in here. And thereafter we can see on the chart that we have a 3-degree glide slope, which we can check in here on the legs page. We cross Axmal at 18,000, at 1,800, and that is our final approach fix, and we have that in here as well. We want to tell the FMC that when we are 10 miles from the landing runway, we want to be no faster than 180 knots. For this reason, looking at the chart, we can, by measuring the distances down here, we can see that Sapin is roughly the 10-mile point. So I am going to enter 180 knots or less, that's the B, / over here at Sapin, and I'm going to execute that so that VNAV is going to start slowing the aircraft down early enough. Moving on then, we can have a look into the missed approach, and that is climb to 3,000 feet, and we can see 3,000 is marked down here on the legs page, on the San Francisco VOR radial 281 towards VQ intersection and hold. And as you can see over here, from the runway waypoint, we go on the 281 track inbound to VQ with the holding towards 3,000 feet. We can cross-check the holding down here on the hold page. VQ 281 right-hand turns, and as you can see on the chart, it's indeed 281 with right-hand turns. So, from here on, let's continue on the progress page. Over here we can see the fuel that we currently have on board and the fuel that we have to have, or that we are expected to have on board on the landing. We calculate the difference between the two, which is 1.4 in this case, and now we go to the inlet reference page, take the current gross weight and subtract 1.4, so that we end up at 136.0. And this is going to be our estimated gross weight on the landing. Now let's move on to our performance calculator. Show landing, show en route, and now we can enter our landing conditions in here. So once again, looking at our Navigraph app and the weather that we have over here, we can see that San Francisco, 28 right, dry runway, all of that is correct. The wind is going to be 290 at 13. As always, use the least possible headwind or the strongest tailwind. The temperature is 17 degrees Celsius and the altimeter setting 30.02. Reversers will by default be all in-up, since we normally use idle reverse as much as possible. Flaps 30 is our preferred landing setting, air conditioning on, anti-ice off, and we have different auto brake settings available, which we can run a couple of calculations with. Today, let's start with 3 and see what we got. We have no non-normal checklist, and our landing weight was just calculated to be 136.0, and we're going to use 5 knots VREF addition. The VREF addition is dependent on the headwind component on the final. So, with a headwind, you want to add half the headwind component, but at least 5 knots and a maximum of 15. You also want to add the entire gust, but again the maximum is VREF plus 15. So let's select no non-normal checklist, and then we can hit calculate, and we can see the landing distance required down here. So this tells us 5,500 feet. If we look at the airport chart, we can see that our runway is almost 12,000 feet long. We've got to vacate over here, so that's got to be like 6,000 feet or something down the runway. So let's try to calculate auto brakes 2 now. Hit calculate, and look at that, 6,500 looks just about perfect. In other words, we can go ahead and select landing config 30. Just double click that and it inserts down here, and your auto brakes towards level 2. The last thing we gotta set up is the ILS. For that, let's bring up the ILS chart and have a look at the values. So the final approach course is 284, and we gotta dial that in up here on the courses. So 284 up there, and 284 up here. Then we have our frequencies of 111.7, which we are going to select down here in the multi-mode receiver, and again be sure that ILS is selected as the active mode, otherwise you will not be able to switch those frequencies active. So 111.7 and 111.7, and last but not least we can tune the San Francisco VOR 115.8 in the standbys, since that is what the missed approach is based upon. Like that. Didn't mean to do this selection over here, disregard that. Finally, the minimum for the approach is 213 feet, and since we're flying an ILS Category 1 approach, we are going to use the barometric minimum. So be sure that the EFIS control panel up here is set to baro, and then we can start dialing down until we see 213 down here on the minimums. And here we go, 213 is now set. Last but not least, verify the landing field elevation, which is 13 feet up here, and cross-check that you actually have the closest possible in the landing altitude selector on the cabin pressurization control panel. So, that concludes our setup of the aircraft for our descent. I do hope you found this one interesting. At this point we will start to commence the approach briefing, run the descent checklist, and with all of that out of the way, we are going to start our descent. However, the descent is going to be for a separate dedicated video, so with all of that, I would like to thank you very much for watching, hope that you learned something today. As always, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, and if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you for watching, and see you all again on the next one.